This is another episode of Remakes Reviews. In this episode, we are talking about Sabrina, the 1954 Golden Age of Hollywood version, and then the 1995 remake with, I think, a very great cast, but we'll get into that in a minute. And if you want to introduce yourself for the audience.
Sure. Hi, I'm Carolynn Cecilia. I am a writer, director, and script supervisor. I'm also a cinema educator. I teach intro to screenwriting and directing at the New York Film Academy.
Awesome. I usually don't go into myself because I would just be repeating the same thing every episode.
But we've never fully met, so maybe you should.
Yeah, I'll tell you about me.
You, Tuesday. Okay.
I'm a filmmaker currently based in New York City.
Fabulous.
My stupid spiel, but I mostly edit, and I'm currently in the middle of launching a little production company called Indigo Media Works, where I do editing, podcast production, obviously, and I'm doing some photography, portrait, headshot photography. So it's a fun venture at the end, hopefully, of a pandemic.
Right. Yeah. Or the middle, or
right.
that first beginning
Who knows?
part.
Right. Yeah. All I know is the industry seems to sort of be coming back. So I'm hoping to kind of capitalize on that and hope for the best.
All the good vibes to you.
Thank you. So let's maybe start with a synopsis for the audience. We can give all the spoilers. That's totally cool.
Okay, good, because everybody dies in this movie. Right, and I don't think people expect that.
It's tragic. It is funny. I don't know why. I went to read a synopsis and I must have gotten distracted halfway through because I expected the movie, when I started watching the original, to have a murder plot. And I was like, when's it coming up?
Really?
Yeah. So I must have got distracted halfway through, read something else, and stitched them together in my mind. And so the movie was it was an interesting experience.
Maybe you were thinking of Rebecca as opposed to Sabrina.
Could be. I watched Rebecca a couple weeks ago. So, maybe I just connected them, but I was like, when's it going to come up? There's only 30 minutes left.
Gosh. I guess we could think about at the end who should have died.
Right. Who would we have killed off?
Yeah, who would we have killed off? Definitely that dog. No,
yeah. So the general synopsis is that there is a girl, Sabrina, who is Sabrina Fairchild, who's the daughter of the chauffeur who gets to work with 20 cool cars because he works for this very wealthy family, the Larrabees. And she's always had a crush on the younger Larrabee brother. His name's David. And in the original, he's played by William Holden. And he has an older brother played by Humphrey Bogart named Linus, which is not really a name you hear a whole lot. But yeah, so she's been crushing on him, and David has no interest in her and doesn't know who she is because she's supposedly this frumpy, regular girl. And this is the part of the story where I was like, I've checked out, as she tries to kill herself because, women in the 1950s, if they can't have that philandering man, I'm
fucking out of here.
But it doesn't work out. She goes to Paris for 2 years, becomes this modern woman who's sexy and sophisticated.
Knows how to crack an egg. Right. Everything's okay.
That's what Paris does to you. Upon her return, David's like, oh, who's this fascinating woman? And finds himself enthralled by her. And wow, this is a long synopsis. So I guess to wrap it up,
there's so much. There's so many ins and outs. You must.
Yeah. So David's trying to do the same moves he's always done on previous women to her. She's down for it because she spied on him the whole time that he did that and was like, I also want that experience for some reason. But things go awry. He sits on glass, gets glass shards in his butt. And so his brother steps in his place, basically, in an attempt to ruin that kindling romance so that he can make this big business deal happen, and also ends up falling for her, of course, because it's a romance. Right? Yeah. So I feel like that covers most of the movie.
That feels pretty good to me. That's a good baseline.
Great. So Maybe let's compare what the original did really well and what the remake did well. Yeah, I guess like whatever the remake might have done just as well, or where it
Sure.
failed, or which space. Did you have a preference
Okay.
for which film?
I am a fan of the 1995 Sabrina, and I have a handful of reasons why, which I'm sure we will get to today.
Yes.
So it's actually the 95 is my preference.
Mine too, which I was surprised to discover, but I think it's like that suicide thing just really
Yes.
took me on like a
Yeah, I think a lot of my reasons are feminist related.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the
It's
choices that were
it's
made. Yeah.
also just interesting to me, like, I don't know if you've seen The Apartment with Shirley MacLaine, but there's like
Hmm.
a similar that movie's from 1960, but there's a similar like I'm having an affair with a man who won't marry me, so let me kill myself. Like, why is
Yes.
this
Yeah.
the golden age when women are just killing them
Yeah.
or attempting to kill
Well, I'm
themselves?
sure we could all I mean, it's all going to come full circle, right? With the poem of Sabrina Fair and
Mhm.
chastity and, virginity and what's a female's worth and so on. So, yes,
Yeah.
it's all related in this deep, kind of amazing way if you get into a dark enough hole with it all,
If you go down that rabbit hole.
which I have been down many times over the years.
Excellent. I mean, since you teach screenwriting, I feel like you are
Uh-huh.
really into and also write scripts. Like you can get into that nitty gritty of the dialogue and how
Oh,
everything
gosh,
does come
yes.
in. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think that's great.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
do appreciate just how black and white movies look. I think, the wardrobe is
Hmm.
beautiful, the settings are really nice, and just like the contrast in the cinematography and
It has that sheen to it.
mhm,
Everyone's skin is so
yeah.
amazing.
Hmm.
But yes, I think for me, of the things that the 1954 version does the best is probably those Edith head costumes
Hmm.
inspired by Givenchy. And they're so classic Audrey Hepburn.
Hmm.
And that's the thing too that is so lovely about the 54 version is that it's Audrey Hepburn and she's
Right.
lovely and she's just fully Audrey Hepburn.
Hmm.
But she's so Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah.
How can you, there's not a frame that you look at her and you're like, what do you mean you didn't notice her?
Right.
She's
Yeah.
so noticeable. That's Audrey
Especially
Hepburn.
because like the 95 version made her look kind of frumpy before she goes away, and
Mhm.
in the original she does not have that. It's like, oh, she had
No.
long hair and now she has short hair, but it's not as if she looked dorky. Like they didn't give her glasses or anything to try to make her look
And
forgettable.
that's what you're supposed to do, right? We
That's
have to
the
give the
trope.
woman glasses
That's
so
how
that
we know.
obviously that's how we know.
Right.
But there is something about the choices Sidney Pollack made for the remake that Julia Ormond genuinely does look like a fucking nerd. I
Hmm.
mean, the way she's dressed, the crazy hair, the glasses.
Yeah.
So for me, when she comes back from Paris, like that
Hmm.
is that's a whole look.
Hmm.
That's how
And
you do it.
you can also tell because they show a little bit more in depth, I think, of her experience in Paris in the remake. So you
Hmm.
see her kind of grow from that like more frumpy girl to she's dating, I think, the photographer that she was training under,
Yes.
and like is becoming a photographer herself. Like she's clearly having growth. Where in
Hmm.
the original, it's like you watch her fail to crack an egg, you watch her not make a souffle at all, and
Hmm.
they never really show her make something successfully that I recall.
No, I don't think so either. Yeah,
So I thought that was
her
interesting.
emotional or inner growth is non-existent in my
Hmm.
opinion in the
Yeah.
54. You're correct. It's all about cracking the egg, whereas in the 95 she doesn't go to the cordon bleu. She goes to internet Vogue,
Hmm.
and you see her genuinely grow from this klutzy, new to being on fashion shoots to actually seeing the art and connecting with photography and how she
Hmm.
looks at the world differently and how that in turn gives her confidence and the ability to look at herself differently. So you get none of that introspection in the
Mm-mm.
54. You just get a beautiful Audrey Hepburn in lovely dresses.
Right. And a little bit of comedy.
A little
Right.
bit.
But I appreciate the growth. I think it makes the remake more meaningful. And I think when you remake a film, you should make it either fit the times or add something
Hmm.
to it. And Sidney Pollack definitely did. And I also really liked the growth we see with her little like pushpin board, where David is slowly becoming smaller and smaller in his poster. I think that's nice. Like, she can lie on the phone all she wants about how she doesn't care, but seeing the visual and like, okay, maybe he is taking up a smaller and smaller piece of her heart. It's nice to see. Although when she comes back, it's no longer true. She goes right back into her.
Well, of course, you see him again, and just like all those feelings bubble up. But there's something that I think the 95 does, where her coming back is, she has so much confidence and a belief in herself. Her goal is not to get David. She's just, and she knows that he's engaged at this point. She just, I'm going to show up and I'm going to do my reveal. We'll see what happens.
Right.
But there's never, women pitted against each other. There's none of that competition for David's affections.
Yeah, the original wasn't his fiance at the party that she was going to, and he ditched his fiance for her.
Yes, in the original, she is there. I think her name is still Elizabeth Tyson. I think so too. And she is there. She just, she's just not around. I don't know where she is in the original. She's just conveniently not around. Whereas in the 95 version, she's at a medical conference in California, because in that version, she has her own life. Right. She has her own goals. She has her own thing going on.
Yeah, which is also nice. Like, she's not some stupid woman who's not gonna realize that her fiance has ditched her for another woman at a party.
Another woman.
Like, she's not even there to notice.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I noticed, particularly when I was rewatching them for this podcast, is, when it all comes to a head and we're learning, or rather David's learning what Linus has been doing and so on, he goes to Elizabeth and he says, I need to tell you a story, and I need you to tell me how it should end. Meaning, like, I'm going to be so honest with you, but I need you to tell me what you would like to do next. Like, he gives her that agency. He gives her that control over the situation, which I think is so great. And I just don't recall him doing that in the 54. No, that she was always going to marry David.
Right. She doesn't care what he does in the original.
Whatever.
Yeah, but it is nice, especially because they gave her this stronger role as a doctor. Doctor, or like head of the hospital. I think
she's like a pediatric surgeon, I believe. Yeah. Like, she's a fully formed human woman,
right,
with her own situation. And in that one, she's the one who proposes to David. She's the one who says, "Oh, then let's get married. Why don't we do it?"
And he was like, "Sure." And then, what was I thinking?
Yeah, I forgot there were other boobs.
Right. I got so caught up in the moment. I said yes. I do think there's like an issue I have with the remake, though, is the way that Linus seems a little bit more sinister in a way, because maybe it's just because it's like Humphrey Bogart in the original. So I just believe that he's like a smoother character who he's like, oh, I'm slowly falling for her, but that's not a good thing. I got to stick with my plan. And this is, I'm going to stick with it. But the Linus in the remake, he strikes me as someone who's like not aware that he's falling for her. That's why it seems a little bit more cruel what he's doing.
I could see that. I've often wondered if that's Linus or if that's just Harrison Ford.
Right.
Harrison Ford has this great way of you don't fully trust him, but that's kind of what makes him hot.
It could be. And it could also be like, I really only see him in action movies, so I expect more obvious maybe acting than like the subtleties.
And his wardrobe in this, the bow tie, the glasses, it's so what a Linus would wear, that it does on Harrison Ford. It doesn't quite, it feels uncomfortable. But for me, it adds to it in this way because he is meant to come off. Oh gosh. I think he's more when he's trying to seduce Sabrina, like he genuinely thinks he could be competition with David.
Right.
He's trying to seduce Sabrina. He thinks all he has to do is put on this hat and she'll know that he's like super chill and cool.
Right. Yeah. That's all
but
you need.
He's the awkward one. He's just as much of an ugly duckling as she was before.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because in the original, it's like I think, maybe had a wife at some point and was single for a long time because they briefly mention
Well, I can never tell if
something.
he's being honest about that.
Mm,
He talks about like a woman had broken his heart and he was going to jump off the side of a building or
right.
something.
But is
And
he
I'm
just
always
being
like,
dramatic to
yeah,
sound romantic?
because that's what women love.
Right. They really
We
like
love it.
the idea
We
of
love a
killing oneself.
suicidal man. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what's up with that plot point in those 50s and 60s movies.
I guess maybe that was the most romantic thing you could do then.
You
I,
hope not.
I don't know. I've got too much shit going on. I don't have time to kill myself. Switching
Oh,
it out over some dude.
another there's like a complete change of direction, but another like feminist thing that I thought was a cool point to do is that the mother in the remake is more involved in the business. She's more in charge. Where in the
Mm-hmm.
original, it's sort of the father, but not really. He's kind of just drunk comedic relief.
I agree.
So
Yeah.
I thought that was nice. Like, okay, she's in charge of the business. She knows what her sons are capable of, and she supports both of them, even if at
Mm-hmm.
times they can annoy her, instead of being like, I'm a cold business woman or some stereotypical character that we usually see.
Now she's full 90s power suits, but avant garde hats.
Mm-hmm. Nice,
She's almost
cool
like
bow thing.
yeah, the dresses and the bows. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the 95, the father figure has died playing golf. They mention it briefly, like I think he had a heart attack or something in Pebble Beach. So Maud has stepped in to run the company. But really it's Linus that
Mm-hmm.
is doing a lot of the actual technical stuff.
Mm-hmm. But it's still nice to see that she has been able to step
Oh,
into that role and not just.
and the actress who plays Maud, I just think is amazing. She, I don't, there's something so like New York, Long Island about
Mm-hmm.
her.
Yeah.
And she's such a great character actress. And she gives the best deadpan lines where these are her boys, but she's tired of them and all of their bullshit. But of
Yeah.
course she loves them and will spoil them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are some sweet and humorous moments. I was really surprised though that they kept I know it's like pivotal to the plot, but that they kept the glass breaking in the pants in the
Okay.
remake, because that seemed like something no one is really stupid enough to do. So,
Probably, but David, oh man.
yeah.
I personally love that plot point. I mean, you need it, right? That's the thing that
Set up.
puts him off his feet and gets him on painkillers so that Linus can swoop in and save the business, save Larrabee corporations and so on. But I understand what you mean. Yeah, like who accidentally sits on champagne glasses in their back pockets?
Right. Yeah. Like in the 1950s, I go, okay, sure. but I'm like, but 40 years later. But
Yeah.
I thought it was also a surprise and kind of funny how relevant it was to still have a plastics company at the center. That it's like, well, plastics, yeah, it's still a really huge industry.
Yeah. And is it the 54 where David at the end is like, I've come up with this idea where we can make plastic champagne glasses?
Yeah. I like that moment. I don't think they did that in the remake because they were busy. I
don't believe they did.
They were busy, giving David autonomy with work.
Yes, exactly.
They were busy filling his story in.
Autonomy.
Yeah.
No time for plastic.
Yeah, that was a nice change from the original, though, that David at the end steps into more of a businessman role.
Yes.
And it's like, well, I can at least take in while my brother's off on his romantic pursuit.
Yes, I'm ready. I'm more prepared than you would expect me to be.
Yes, that I've
who knows where my office is.
Right. Yeah. I read all those emails for 10 years or whatever.
Yes.
But I don't come to the building.
Yes, precisely.
Let's see.
I think it's also I often forget that this was Greg Kinnear's first film role.
No. Really?
Yes, I promise it is.
Oh, wow.
And I had learned I don't remember if he had done television before. I think he was doing some kind of super late night hosting of something.
Okay.
And Sidney Pollack just thought he would be great in this role. And from
Mm-hmm.
there, like his career just really took off because I really think he's the perfect David.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I think especially like comparing him to how William Holden played the character, like you kind of have to be like a lovable guy who seems a little bit, I guess, stupid for
Yeah.
like not an actual idiot, but just like maybe clueless is a better term. Is that his
Yes. A
priorities aren't
genuine,
in the
yes.
right focus? Yeah.
He is a playboy, but he is not malicious.
Right.
Um, I would like to think that he respects a woman's boundaries.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, who knows? Well, that's the great thing, a thing that 90s movies in general did, where everyone was mostly well behaved when it came to
Mm-hmm.
boundaries. You know, nobody was too bad. They let you exist in this world where everyone's safe. I think
Mm-hmm.
is probably the best. So no matter who goes into the solarium, they go in willingly.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
You know what I did think was kind of amusing? I Julia Ormond was doing like the 1950s accent, Hollywood
Okay.
accent.
Where
And
it's very refined and
yeah,
elegant.
it sounds like it's like the made up accent where you have to sound it's like not European or in, like not quite British, but like high class old Hollywood.
Okay.
And I thought that was a weird choice because this is, you know, the 90s and no one else is doing
Uh,
it.
I think that is actually her accent because I believe she speaks the same way. She had just come off of First Night with Sean Connery and Richard Gere.
Mm.
And I think maybe the year or two before she had done Legends of the Fall. And I believe that's genuinely how she speaks.
Oh, I thought she was like,
I could be
I
wrong.
thought she was trying to mimic the voice Audrey Hepburn had in the original.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go and listen to some interviews. I'm
I
not
I
really
haven't
sure.
done my research to know either, but that's
Okay.
just when I started playing it, I was like, interesting. Why would she do
Okay.
that? But maybe that is just how she sounds, and I'm like, no
I
one.
think it is. And I say this as someone who, I mean, the 90s are very formative years for me. So as a very young girl being like, oh, that's what elegance is. That's what charm. I just always assumed that that is the refined way a woman would speak.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Of
Coming
course
back
she's
from
going to
Paris.
Paris. Yes,
Right.
coming back from Paris.
That's funny.
But I had a genuine obsession with Julia Ormond for a few years there. I mean, she got to make out with all the cool guys.
Mhm. I saw something. Oh, I'm totally blanking now on who. Oh, I watched it on Prime, and you know, Prime's got those little pop up info
Okay.
boxes, and it was like Winona Ryder was originally set to play it, but she thought that she couldn't like do the role justice compared to Audrey Hepburn, which
hmm
was probably true.
hmm
Like I like
I
Winona
could
Ryder, but it would be very hard to see her
I
in
could
this
not
film.
imagine. I
Yeah.
do. The character of Sabrina, I think, needs
Mm-hmm.
that underlining refinement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah, I just can't see Winona Ryder doing it. But I also think that, I mean, so Audrey Hepburn, obviously, she does the role, a lot of her costumes. She's fully Audrey Hepburn, super tiny snatch waist,
Mm-hmm.
the black tight leggings, the fitted shirts. But Julia Ormond, it's a bit more loose. It's that 90s fashion, the blazers with the rolled up sleeves. She's not a super tiny waif. To me,
Right.
she feels
Yeah.
a bit more womanly
Mm-hmm.
um, in the way that she portrays it. Yeah, and so I can't imagine Winona Ryder in that role. But I think
Yeah.
I had also heard that they were thinking Gwyneth Paltrow. They were
Oh.
thinking, I mean,
Like
anybody,
any, yeah.
any like woman in her early to mid 20s in the
Right.
90s, I think they were considering. But
Oh,
for me
interesting.
personally, I couldn't imagine it not being Julia Ormond.
Yeah, I think she was a good choice. And I just like really like her features and watching them. It's great. I do like the way that the remake modernized a lot of things. Like obviously you have to do an airplane instead of like a cruise ship across the Atlantic, but to
Yes.
have it be like a summer home instead of that yacht trip, I thought was nice that they gave that Linus's character is like, how can I get her alone with
Oh,
me? Oh,
yes.
she's a
Yes.
photographer. We'll have her take photos of this to sell. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's better than just a picnic on a boat scheme.
Well, I think the 54 was shot on a soundstage. I know all the Paris stuff was shot on a soundstage, whereas the 95 is shot on location in Paris. And then all of the house stuff that's supposed to be Long Island in the 54 is actually Beverly Hills. So they're doing like these green screens, the yacht, the picnic, whereas in this one, they actually shot on location in Long Island. So they're going to show you that more sailboat kind of town, very quaint, very innocent, I suppose, definitely more photographic. Yeah.
And also just that the lead in the remake has career aspirations that we are allowed to see a snippet of. Like, okay, yes. She has been learning photography. Here she is doing the photography. Okay. There's something happening here.
Yes. We didn't just say that she liked photography for the sake of saying that she liked photography. Whereas, as we were saying before, Audrey Hepburn's character goes to study at the Cordon Bleu and comes back, and the only time you see her do anything remotely chef-like is she cracks one egg in Linus's office. But it's never really spoken of again. She's still... I guess it's still assumed that some man will come in and take care of her.
Because she doesn't need a job. She's a housewife.
She doesn't.
That's why she learned to crack an egg.
And if it doesn't work out, she can just kill herself.
Right. Moral of the story. I thought the casting for both films was great in general. Like, we talked about that a little bit, but I do think like Humphrey Bogart as the older brother, although at first I was like, oh, is he the dad of David? Because he is a lot older, right?
A little bit.
Yeah, and I feel like...
I think technically he could be Audrey's father.
So
yeah.
And in the remake, it seems like they're a little bit closer in age, not quite, or at least like her dad's character seems older than Linus. So it's not as uncomfortably odd. But I think like all of the characters worked really well together in both films.
Yeah. Do you recall if in the 54 her father had also invested in stock?
I don't believe that he did. Nor did he fall in love with another staff member.
Yes. So the storyline so for those who may not know, is the father is the chauffeur, and he reveals that over the years he's been listening in on Linus's business deals. So he's been buying and trading stock, and he's made over $2 million. And it's, I guess what we haven't mentioned before is that Sabrina started out, before it was the Audrey Hepburn film, it was a play, a mildly successful play on Broadway. So in the play version, they do keep that storyline. And
interesting.
I think what's interesting about doing that is, so when they bring it back for the 95, he says, like, your mother and I always wanted to do this for you. So you can take this money and have options. Like, you can do anything that you want. We're so proud of you. You've exceeded our expectations. And so when the film ends and Sabrina does decide to give Lionel the chance and to genuinely try it, she is doing it on her own accord. She does not need this man. She is fully taken care of. And I think that's so wonderful, but that's something that they don't do in the 54.
No, and I think it's really nice just for the role of Sabrina's father, that of course, if you're driving someone around who's constantly talking about business, you're bound, especially after 10, 20, maybe almost 30 years, you're bound to pick up the ins and outs of what they do to some extent. So to be able to use that to one's own advantage, I think, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, they gave the father, they also gave him that little backstory where she says to her father in the 95, I've always loved that you chose to be a chauffeur so that you would have more time to read. And so they're showing, yes, in some ways the movie touches on class, but he's not a chauffeur because he couldn't possibly do anything else. He enjoyed what he did. He really wanted to read. He was an intellectual man, and he raised his daughter to be very similar. And I think in the 95, they had also touched on, she doesn't belong in the garage, but she doesn't belong in the mansion. She exists in between, like most people do. And that's fine.
Right. Yeah, I think they did a really good job in the remake showing us that, or I guess just not falling into typical movie stereotypes and tropes.
Mm-hmm.
So, you
Which is
know,
helpful so that you don't end up hating the family, the rich family.
yeah,
You're never like, God, they're rich and I hate them and they're terrible to
right.
everybody. They're nice people.
Mm-hmm.
They're just this particular family. They're I was going to say their hearts aren't where they're supposed to be, but I think it's that their hearts are dormant. They're not
Mm-hmm.
actively using their hearts. They're so busy with their heads that they're not paying attention. And then here comes Sabrina, who's all heart,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of awakens this thing within them.
But that's even one of Sabrina's lines is that Linus, one of the jokes among staff is that he is a living heart donor.
Yeah, he's the world's only
Only
living
living,
heart donor. Yes.
which was very funny
Yes, yes.
and
I think, and
believable.
in that scene, she starts to tell him all the things that people have always thought about him. He's like,
Mhm.
"That's enough. Like, I
Right.
think I've got this gist.
Yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
I know what I am."
One thing that I was surprised over was that the remake also felt a little slow to me in
Okay.
terms of pacing. And I expect that of any like pre 1970s film because it's, you want to have like that long drawn out tension.
Yeah.
So I was surprised the remake still, they kind of kept that. And I was like, I gotta pause at like an hour because I only want there to be 30 more minutes and there's a whole nother hour.
Oh.
And I was like, I gotta go stretch my legs or like, shake out
Well, that's
my,
fair. Yeah, you gotta
yeah.
take a breather. You're like, which
Hmm.
way is she gonna go? Really, she doesn't need any of these dudes.
She doesn't.
But I kind of want her to be with this one. Um, Gosh, I've never really thought about the pacing. I guess whenever it feels a little bit slower, there's always like a lovely cocktail party to look
Hmm.
at, or
Right.
Sabrina running with the fireworks behind her, or you're looking at her amazing face, and it's like, God, that is a great haircut, even though it's a little mullet like it's a
Yeah.
little long in the back.
Right.
But gosh, she pulls it off so
But she can
well.
pull it off. Yeah.
And I think it's a great nod to the woman that she meets in Paris, who kind of becomes her mentor, because
Hmm.
it's such a similar style and look that she's taken on. And that woman who says, I came to Paris and I was lost and I had to spend time and learn who I was and write in my journal and take walks on the bridge. And Sabrina's like, that's what I'm going to do. I want your
Hmm.
haircut. I'm going to have your life
Yep.
and make it my own.
I'm gonna find myself also.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like what else really stuck out to me.
Hmm.
The solarium scene in the original, it comes across as like this really kind of romantic, flirty scene. But it
And
surprised me in
it's on
the
a tennis court too, instead of the solarium.
and it
Hmm.
surprised me in the remake though that like Linus kissed her rather aggressively and she slaps him. So they
Yes.
even start out that sort of relationship on a different foot where he has to almost like dig himself out of a hole.
Yes, you're right. In the original, when Linus kisses her, she doesn't even respond. She's just like in this dreamy
Right.
state of,
Everything's beautiful and
oh, I'm just
romantic.
so overwhelmed. Whereas, yes, in the 95, she says, fuck you, I didn't say you could do that.
Right.
But she does it so charming when she's like, I've left my handprint on your face. But he
But
says, I deserve that. I
mhm.
deserve that. Yeah.
And it makes sense when they do lead into that like Seatown moment where he's lying to make himself look good and then ends up following up on that later because he's
Hmm.
like, oh, I want to like look like a better person in her eyes and see that I am like a valuable, kind human, not just
Yeah.
this stoic businessman who only thinks about money.
Yeah, yeah.
Although asking,
Which is interesting because he's not materialistic, but
mm-mm,
it's more of that corporate mindset where, you got to keep the family name alive. Let's make deals. It's
mm-hmm,
very New York, but he in no way, he's not, I mean, David's the fast cars, fancy suits kind of guy. Whereas Linus, he likes the game.
mm-hmm, he definitely does. Oh, in the end, I was a little bit confused until the rest of the scene revealed itself when Elizabeth seems catty at first in the office room, and I was like, wait a minute, what is going on? And then it shifts because they were just pushing Linus to realize his feelings, which
Yeah,
I thought was kind of nice. They didn't really do that I recall in the original. I think like they,
I think
because
you're right.
David didn't show up. David shows up, and so he knows that she's alone and is
Mm-hmm.
upset about that, but they're not like pushing him to realize anything beyond like she's going to
Mm-hmm.
Paris by herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was an interesting. I think what this choice does is it puts David and Elizabeth, and it shows that they are a good match.
Mm-hmm.
That they actually do work well together. And you don't really get to see them that much, and you just kind of assume this is a relationship he's fallen into. But he's come to her, like I said, he's been very honest. What should
Mm-hmm.
we do? And they team up together.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to know what that conversation was between them. But she's
Right.
like, yeah, let's do this. Obviously, we have to figure out how to get Linus together. I'm a smart, independent woman.
Right.
We'll make it seem like I'm a catty bitch.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, it's really about us putting two lovers in the same
Mm-hmm.
place.
Right. And
Which
then
I
we
like.
can peacefully be married together.
Yes, yes. And
Yeah.
you'll do whatever it is that you do. And
Right.
I'll keep saving babies. Yeah.
Yeah. I really expected that cliche airport scene at the end where Linus like meets her just before the plane takes off or whatever. And so I was pleasantly surprised that that was not going to be what happens, that he like shows
Mhm.
up outside her hotel or wherever she's staying in Paris.
Yeah, he gets there first because he takes the Concorde, the now defunct Concorde, which is so much faster. So he actually beats her to Paris and waits for her outside
Mm-hmm.
of this hotel, and they have this little moment. And of course she's taken back of, what are you doing here? I
Right.
guess he couldn't text first.
Right. Yeah. He would have
That's
had to
amazing.
like call from the airplane.
Yes. And he also gets his father's or her father's approval on the
Mm-hmm.
way. He's the father just says, you don't deserve her. And he says, I know, but I need her and I don't need anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was really sweet.
That's very nice. Yeah. So I think overall, the remake is more enjoyable and more uplifting in terms of its story and message.
Yeah, and definitely gives the female characters more power and
Mm-hmm.
autonomy and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing that they didn't put in the 54 that came from the play was when she explains how she gets the name Sabrina and saying, it comes from this poem about what is it, a sprite that saves a virgin from a fate
Mm-hmm.
worse than death. And of course, Linus says, oh, so Sabrina's the virgin. She says, no, Sabrina's the savior.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think there's so much power in that.
Mm-hmm.
And it says so much about the way that Sidney Pollack chose to portray this character in a more modern era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would guess that the 1954 version would have had her as the virgin character.
Oh, sure. Yeah. They don't even
Not the
mention
savior.
the poem.
No.
We're like, we're not going
They're like,
there.
we'll confuse the audience if we explain where the name comes from.
We don't like poetry.
Yeah. You know what? It's really funny to me, the remakes from like the Rebecca remake and this remake, that because the original movie starts out and ends with some narration over these shots of like this grand mansion and land, it's very funny to me that remakes of will include those when
Okay.
those aren't really typical of how we currently make movies or how we made movies in the 90s. I think it's an
Hmm.
interesting thing to be like, well, this is what they did in the original and we want to be true to that to a certain extent. So
Hmm.
we'll basically copy paste the intro and then the
And the
outro.
outro.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's really interesting. It's like a really interesting way to, I guess, pay homage while also, I don't know what, like reminding
Hmm.
modern audiences that that's how movies used to start.
Other than Rebecca and Sabrina, I would wonder where else you're finding that. And I say that because for me, that voiceover for Sabrina actually makes sense because this is meant to be a fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Cinderella meets the ugly duckling fairy tale. So having that, once upon a time on the North Shore of Long Island,
Right.
that also very Katharine Hepburn kind of style of speaking. So having that narrator come in and remind you that once upon a time and happily ever after, though in Rebecca, it's not really a happily ever after. But I would be curious to know what other remakes are taking that
Yeah.
from the original, that intro
I have
and
to watch
outro.
more films from the 1950s, but so far that seems to be a recurring theme I'm noticing. But
Yeah.
yeah.
It's so fascinating that you can make a film and some people will go in and they'll make almost all the same similar choices, right? And
Mhm.
I could say that even for Sabrina, there's some of the lines that are exactly the same,
Mhm.
some of the shots feel exactly the same.
Yeah, the intro
And
I
yeah,
wrote down, I
yeah,
think it was like, "Is this a shot for shot remake?" And then it
right.
started to deviate.
Yeah, and yet it still manages to feel like its own thing.
Mhm.
And that's something when you talk, you start talking about You've Got Mail versus In the Good Old Summertime versus In the Shop Around the Corner,
Mhm.
and how in The Shop Around the Corner and the most recent You've Got Mail, there some of the dialogue is exactly the same. The pacing is exactly the same. It's bizarre. And yet
Mhm.
they still managed to make it universal and timeless.
Mhm.
And I love when a
Yeah,
movie
wow.
is able to do
Imagine
that.
remaking, like, a Nora Ephron film.
Oh my gosh. I think
I
that
don't
would
think
be
it'd
a
go
remake
well.
where I'm like, I'm not, no. I'm like, don't
Yeah.
do it. She was iconic and she was amazing.
Unless
Don't
it's
do it.
been, like,
Maybe
50,
30
60
years.
years. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Give it more
But could you
time.
imagine someone remaking Sleepless in Seattle?
No.
Or, I mean, come
And
on.
I know they would cast people I do not wanna see
No.
just
I
because
don't,
they're popular.
no. Yeah. I don't
Yeah,
need another When Harry Met Sally.
right,
I definitely don't need another You've Got Mail. It's
right.
flawless as it is.
And what you do, it's like everyone can text now. It's not the same excitement of logging onto a dial-up computer and AOL.
That movie would be so short in
Right.
this day and age.
It's
Let's
just
do a You've Got Mail, but she immediately finds his Instagram profile and was
right,
like, "Oh yeah, I don't like that dude," and then
right.
it's just done.
He's gonna destroy my business. Next.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
there anything else about the 2 Sabrinas that we didn't mention or maybe didn't go
Oh
into enough depth
gosh,
on?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I
I
think we
feel like
covered a
we've
good
talked it so much, and yet at the same time, I could start from the beginning. Okay, so on the North Shore of Long Island,
Right.
there lived a family. You had the inside tennis courts and the outside tennis
Right.
courts. Now I think we've covered it all. I mean, well, I will say one thing that really dates the 95 Sabrina in this more comical way is the Paris fashion shoots.
Mm.
Those, it's so 90s fashion, and
Mhm.
it's where they're trying to be avant-garde, and the
Right.
color, it's just amazing to me.
It
And that might be something
is so
that works
comical.
against its timelessness or its
Mhm.
classicness. Like, it feels very dated in those particular sections.
But maybe it kind of still works because, like, we tend to think of France as a more artistically unique space.
Okay.
So, like, having a model with gloves that shoot water out of her fingertips,
Yeah.
maybe that is something I could see today.
I mean, I would love to wear that as a Halloween costume and see if anybody got it. Like, do you know
Mhm.
what this is?
Yes, in
I
my
don't,
pink.
is this too much of a dated reference? Am
Right.
I a millennial? What
Are
is,
you familiar with 1995 films at all?
yeah. Did you have an odd obsession with Julia Ormond
Right.
in the mid 90s?
Was that just me?
Okay,
That
fair.
would be really funny. But you need the other model to be with you who has the umbrella.
Yeah, does it make sense if you don't have all of the
Right.
models
You
in
need
those
the whole
clear
collection.
rain suits?
Yeah, yeah, you need the whole bunch.
All right.
Well, where can people find you online if they wanna know what you're up to or
Oh gosh. Well, all of my social media handles are actually Carolyn Cecilia, and Carolyn is with two N's. It's a good old classic Southern spelling. Um, yeah, where I post about weird movies from the 90s and the movies that I'm making and the books that I'm reading and my own unhealthy obsession with Paris.
Inspired by Sabrina?
It probably.
That's so funny.
It's very likely. I remember the first time I went to Paris having those moments of, I remember that from the movie and I remember that bridge from the movie. So if I really think back far enough, it could very well be this movie that started it all. Or Ratatouille. I don't know.
Right.
It could be one or the other.
Two great films.
Excellent.
Cool. Thank you for hopping on and chatting with me about Sabrina 1 and 2.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel very lucky to be here.